¿Tampoco? Ahora, vale. ¿Me habéis oído algo de lo que he dicho? Bueno, pues el siguiente ponente es Jakob Suckale, viene de la Universidad de Tübingen y, Jakob, todo tuyo.
Me voy a instalar un momento, un segundo. Okay, I'm not very good in Spanish and definitely not in Euskera, so I hope you understand my English better than I did the little introductions that we had at the beginning of some talks. It's great to be here. It's my first time at the center of the universe, as we just heard. So I didn't know about this. I'm great that I finally found it, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it. You know, overcast clouds, a little bit of rain. Reminds me very much of England or northern Germany. But it's great to be here. Thanks for the invite. Thanks to you for coming. I hope I can bring something interesting to you. I'm a teaching professor, so that's a bit unusual, and that's what I want to talk to you about. I want to talk a little bit about learning. I want to talk a little bit about teaching. And I want to kick it off by asking you, how old do you think the method of teaching as we do here, you know, the lecture, how old is that? Any takers? Well, I think I can demonstrate. Let me show you. So this is about it, you know. All you need is a bed linen from your hotel. And you can go back to the old Greeks, to the old Romans, you know, they were there. One guy, you know, with usually even grayer hair, talking there to the younger ones. This wasn't there, okay, no PowerPoint, but I mean, this in many situations is actually more to the benefit of the speaker, so they can jog their mind, they know where they are, you know, they know what to, they see what they're going to show next here on the slide. I would say the majority of slides, you can actually lose them. They're not beneficial for the listeners. They often have too much text, and take that away, we are basically doing things as they used to be done, you know, hundreds of years ago. So very little has changed, and for me this has always been a very surprising thing, because the people that talk to you, these are guys that, you know, spend their life focusing on evidence. They search facts, they discover new data, they try to synthesize it, they bring this into their scientific lecture, but when it comes to teaching, they're on a completely different planet. You know, they often don't look at all at the evidence of what, you know, works in teaching. And there is plenty of evidence, and I'm going to show you, I'm going to summarize a little bit of it. So one thing, for example, people started off researching how well do the lectures work. So, you know, the easiest readout is if you have a final exam after a lecture course, you know, say I'm working in biochemistry, you know, you're teaching biomolecules, proteins, DNA, RNA, sugars, lipids, and so on and so forth. And then you have a final exam, and you compare two types of teaching styles. You know, you compare a classic lecture with somebody like me talking, a couple of slides, you sit the final exam, and then you do something different and you see how it compares in the grades. And it's pretty clear that the standard lecture is quite inferior to mixing it up a little bit, you know, having new technologies, new methods, new didactics in it. And it improves the final result in these simplistic studies, which of course, you know, just the final exam is not even the whole story. So people like me that focus mainly on teaching, we try to introduce these things into our lectures. And one thing that I have, for example, done, I don't know whether you guys have something equivalent to I Want to Be a Millionaire on television, you know, where people say, you know, have different options, and then they can choose A, B, C, D. We hand out clickers. You can do it with your mobile phones. You can have a little machine in the hands. You can teach something about a protein. You can ask the audience, and you can see what they answer in real time. So you have the bar charts coming up on your slide. Who chose which option? And this, as a lecturer, it gives you a very good insight of whether, you know, the stuff that you've been talking about actually got to the people that you hoped to convey this information to. Other research is pointing in the direction of attention span. I'm about 4 or 5 minutes in, so I'm still good. You know, this is a time where people are still at, you know, almost the top of the game, but it gets iffy around there between 5 and 10 minutes when people, you know, start checking their Twitter. You know, now you have a lot of new addresses that you can go to. They check their Facebook, or, you know, they just doze off and tension goes down. So this is something that you, if you want to give a good seminar, a good lecture, you have to work this in. You know? So, for example, you have to stop and you have to ask the audience whether the majority of the lectures that you have been listening to in your career, is it the standard lecture format, or do you have some examples of people mixing it up in your undergraduate careers? What's your personal experience? Standard lecture everywhere? Have you ever seen these clickers before? You know, these little machines, you use them in the university? Other research goes, for example, in the direction of what works for the students, and there are some big surprises there. For example, it's pretty clear that if you sit there and you do some writing, that's actually very good for your learning. And for me, it was very interesting to read these papers because people nowadays are increasingly moving digital, and it turns out that, for example, writing things down, typing them in, works much worse for you as a student, as a learner, than writing it down by hand. So there seems to be something, you know, more basic there, maybe, you know, because you've grown up in high school doing writing with your hand all the time. It's more, you know, it's more lower brain. You don't have to focus so much. You don't have the distraction that you have from a computer screen, you know, where you have pop, pop, you know, your emails and your messages, and they can divert you off the track. So that's something that is there, but then sometimes there are surprises, like, for example, research done on lecturers with weird accents. So if you have the Italian lecturer here in the beginning and he talks and it's a little bit strange how they talk, then most students would rate that as a worse experience, but they actually learn just the same. So sometimes the perception of the students doesn't go along with what they actually take away from the lectures. So there are some interesting bits and pieces there. And since I focus on this in most of my career, I also want to show you some of the new things that I contributed. So let me see whether I can find it. So what we are trying to do in my university is we try to find the video that we put there, for one. Here it is. So I believe, oh, it doesn't even show. Yeah, here we go. Everything you do in lectures so far has been 2D, right? And if you work in biology and biochemistry like I do, you can now buy a relatively simple printer for, you know, $500 to $1,000. You can print out the models that you want to show people. You know, you need to put support under it. This is what's being removed here in the time-lapse movie. So you need to peel off the support, and then you can get to the scientifically accurate model of, for example, a protein complex. And here you see all the pieces. Then you put them together. I don't know whether anybody has recognized this one already. This is the Atp Synthase, right? It has these blocks up there at the top. You connect them with an elastic string. You put them on the stalk. You close it up. You assemble it all together, and you will get a model of the molecule as you never were able to see it before. You know, you see it in lectures always in 2D. It doesn't give you this sense of depth. It doesn't give you the tactile sense. So this is something that works much, much better than just a flat slide to actually perceive the molecule. You know, you can touch it, you can see it. This is the stalk going in, and then at the very end you will see a time-lapse movie of how this rotates to generate ATP from a proton gradient, right? Okay. So this is one of the things that we do. I've also brought a couple of models, so if you want to actually lay your hands on some, this is how they look like. You just go to the database, you download the structural data, and then you have different materials. So here you have, for example, a very hard material is in blue the histone, and you can print also in a flexible material. So you can actually build a model where you can wrap the DNA around a histone, just like it would happen in your cells, to go from meters of DNA in one cell to pack it all into a couple of tens of nanometers big nucleus. So this is an evolving new career track, to have people focus on teaching in university and institutes. It's growing from a small base, admittedly, so there are not a lot of people that actually work in this area. It's actually quite established at other universities, mostly non-state European universities like some American universities. If you went there, for example, to do an undergraduate, you would meet so-called preceptors. These are people that are full-time teachers, so they're very focused on this activity, and they spend much more time researching how to do it well. They mostly teach, if you take, for example, Harvard, they mostly teach in the basic undergraduate courses. So if you do basic mathematics, you would find a preceptor. If you do, for example, basic chemistry, you would see these people. And very different to the previous speakers, these guys are only evaluated by their teaching quality, student feedback, other metrics that the university puts. So in these career tracks, you don't have to worry about papers. You usually don't have to worry about funding. It's mostly about how well you educate people. And for me, this has always been a strange thing about university. Universities, in my opinion, they have two main outputs. On the one side, they do research, so of course they generate new information. That's very important, and it's a very well developed branch of the university. Most of the guys that you have as speakers here, they are 90% evaluated by the research output that they do, papers, grants coming in. This is very, very important. So naturally, they don't really focus much on the other branch, and it's a very thin branch. But in my opinion, it's a very important one, and that's to educate people, to help them become better, to help them, have a broader base of knowledge, have a more critical approach to knowledge, to dissect things more critically. And this is the other big branch of university, but in terms of how the careers are set up, this is very underrepresented. Since almost all of your professors, they evaluated based on research, so some of them at least do the teaching as quickly as possible to get it over with, so they can go back to the lab and focus on what's really important. And there are a few universities that are starting to realize that this may not be the best way to set things up. And for example, my job now is at a German university that has created half a dozen teaching professorships in the sciences. So I'm together with a set of 6-7 colleagues, chemistry, biology, computer science, mathematics, physics, and guys that some of us still do a little bit of research kind of in the evening, but most of us really focus full-time on teaching. So we have a lot of time to read the teaching papers, try to put that into our lectures and seminars, try to find new formats, like the 3D that I showed you. This takes a lot of time to do, so it's not something that, a normal research professor can do in its spare time. And this, at least in our universities and the universities that do that, has, I think, improved teaching a lot. If you think of this as a career choice, let me warn you, I came from the typical research career, pre-doc, postdoc. I worked in molecular diabetes. Then I was looking for jobs. I had, my CV sent to plenty of pharmaceutical companies, universities, some postdocs. And then I found this weird job advert where it said, we're looking for a lecturer. What is a lecturer? And then I saw, I phoned them up and said, I have no idea what you want. Tell me what's going on. And they said, look, we are looking for people that focus mostly on research. You have to mostly on teaching, you have to leave your research behind. And I said, because I'd been doing, science open days, these little things, that you can do in parallel to your pre-doc or postdoc. I always liked that, and I just dove in and tried it. And I have to say, I really enjoy it because it gives me a much broader scientific overview. I no longer work, for 3 years on one protein. I like working with people. That's great, and I see, my role in helping them get better. So it's a very indirect feedback. I don't get bigger grants. I don't get, the big listing in the PubMed database, but I enjoy, seeing the master students of biochemistry, which is where I mostly teach, get better, get good jobs, write back to me, say, I found a great PhD in the German Cancer Center, or, I'm doing a postdoc in the US. For me, this is really satisfying, but I also want to warn you that in Europe, this is starting from a very low base. So, for example, in Germany, we have, maybe under 50 teaching professorships over all the universities. It's growing very slowly, and there's some resistance also from the research professors because they're not sure whether this model is actually good. I hope that we will be able to convince them and the students and the funding bodies. So be ready if you want to do this, be ready to go abroad because it's more developed, for example, in the Netherlands, it's more developed in the US where you can find these positions at higher numbers, and it's also more professionally done compared to some European universities. So with these thoughts, I want to leave you. I also invite you to ask me questions now. We still have, we're now at 16 minutes. We still have a couple of minutes if they're direct questions. If you want to see the models, I have a couple more. But they don't really work very well over a distance. So come, catch me at the coffee break and we can have a look at those. Or print your own, Thanks.
Gracias, Jakob. No sé si hablas algo de español, me ha parecido que sí.
Sí, hablo.
¿Quieres?
Euskera nada, pero
Euskera nada.
Si preferís en
¿Prefieres
español,
las preguntas en inglés o en español?
A mí me da igual.
Te da igual. Vale. Bueno, yo solo quería decir que es bastante refrescante ver una charla sin PowerPoint, es una maravilla. Yo lo tengo ahí pendiente, intentar hacerlo alguna vez en mi vida, pero siempre me asusta muchísimo no tener ahí la protección del PowerPoint. Pero bueno, ha sido estupendo ver hacerlo. Creo que hay una pregunta por aquí.
Yes, I was wondering, I think you were suggesting that the model that is being applied in Germany is teaching professorships in the lower grades, let's say, and then in the higher grades of the university, the professors are actually researchers that do teaching. Do you think this is the best model, or are there alternatives? Also to keep teaching close to research somehow.
So Germany follows history, and in Germany, this researcher-professor model has been really, cemented by Humboldt, which is one of the big shot science politicians and scientists. And this model is 95% of the German academic landscape. You are a research professor first, and then you do a little bit of teaching on the side. But as you can hear from what I've been saying, I don't think this is the ideal model, because you have some people that are great at researching, and honestly, and to put it bluntly, they're crap at teaching. They don't want to do it, they're not good at it, they have to do it, they give the lecture, students are sitting there, slumping over, and the university would be much better off to just adjust it more to the personal preference and the abilities of the people. And Germany is doing this little experiment, with these couple dozen teaching professors. I think it's very promising, but we have to see how much money goes into this. So in Germany, for example, the professors are paid on 3 scales, really, simplistic and stupid. There's a scale 1, there's a scale 2, and there's a scale 3. And the 3 is the biggest professors, they earn the most money. I'm a scale 1 professor, and it's still currently unclear what they're going to do with these jobs in the long term, whether they're kind of going to bump us up into scale 2 or whether they are going to leave us there with a little bit of extra. In the long term, it's not clear because they've done this experiment for 6-7 years. And as many politicians, they haven't really thought beyond, their period of legislation. So they're leaving us a little bit there, to be lab rats and see what's going to happen in the next couple of years.
¿Hay tiempo para una pregunta más?
Hi, thank you for your talk. My Spanish is also crap. I've got a question. When you talk about new teaching methods, so not having the professor, talking to 200 students, and you want to come up with something they can touch, but doesn't that limit your class size? If you teaching in a one-on-one course. I was in Italy with 400 other students. Can you find methods that work also on like a big audience at like 400 students?
So this is of course a more hands-on method, right? I mean, for you guys sitting in the back rows, if you were able to tell me what molecule this is, I would actually be surprised. I mean, it's so far away that it's probably hard to recognize. And you know, you've only seen the simplistic cartoons that look very different from the real deal. What I'm trying to do for bigger classes, so I'm using this mostly in small seminars. But you know, for example, I'm trying to take myself out of some of those seminars by, you know, giving these things to students, asking them to print a model, so try to make it more independent, which conserves some of my time. So because of course, you know, if I have 200 people, I cannot do 20 seminars of 10 people, it's impossible. But you know, if you move it out more towards the students, you can get their hands on the models and they benefit from the touching, from the seeing, you know, from the, you know, actually having it in their hands, and it works without, you know, too much of my input. For bigger groups, what I am aiming to do is, you know, use 3D glasses. So where I would project it like in a classic PowerPoint presentation, and then you would have these simple polarizing glasses where you can still see it. And you know, I would show a movie of what I showed you in the 3D printer, probably virtually generated, not an actual physical model, and show it moving in this way. So that's something that you can port. But you always have this problem of methods that don't fit on all scales. Some are good for seminars, 10, 20 people. Some are okay for lectures, you know, 150 to 100. 400 sounds scary though. Thanks. So I enjoyed this. I hope you got something from it. If you want to see the models, find me out there.